The wind howled across the barren fields of the small farming town, carrying with it an icy chill that seemed to seep into every crack and crevice. It was a night like any other for Owen Callan, a man whose life revolved around his crops, his animals, and the quiet solitude of his modest farmhouse. He had lived here all his life, inheriting the land from his father, who had inherited it from his own. Generations of Callans had worked this soil, coaxing life out of the stubborn earth despite droughts, floods, and everything else nature threw their way. Owen wasn't what one might call ambitious. He didn't dream of wealth or fame. Instead, he found contentment in routine, the rhythmic swing of his scythe, the soft braying of his donkey at dawn, the creak of the old wooden gate as he carried buckets of feed to the chickens. His days were predictable, simple, even mundane to some, but they suited him just fine. But tonight felt different. The air carried an unusual tension, thick enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. As Owen trudged through the frost-covered field, lantern in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. The thought made him chuckle under his breath. "Paranoia," he muttered to himself. "Years alone out here will do that to a man." Still, when he reached the edge of his property, where the forest loomed like a dark wall against the starlit sky, he paused. Something about the shadows there seemed off. Not quite right. Shaking his head, he turned back toward the house, deciding it was nothing more than his imagination playing tricks on him after too many hours working by himself. Little did he know, his world was about to change forever. As Owen approached the barn, preparing to lock up for the night, a faint sound caught his attention, a whimper, barely audible over the wind. At first, he thought it might be one of his sheep, perhaps injured or stuck somewhere. But as he followed the noise, stepping cautiously through the darkness, he realized it wasn't coming from the pen. It was closer, almost behind him now. Spinning around, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows across the ground, Owen froze. There, huddled against the side of the barn, was a figure unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, not pale exactly, but iridescent, like moonlight reflecting off water. She wore tattered remnants of what looked like a strange, metallic fabric, torn and battered beyond recognition. Her limbs were slender yet strong-looking, and her eyes, those piercing, luminescent eyes, locked onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. For a moment, neither moved. Owen's mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. Was she human? Alien? A figment of his imagination brought on by exhaustion? Before he could decide, she let out another weak whimper, clutching her stomach as if in pain. That snapped him out of his stupor. "Hey, hey," Owen said softly, lowering the lantern so its glow wouldn't blind her. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." His voice trembled slightly, unsure whether he should approach or run for the safety of the house. But something stopped him, the unmistakable vulnerability in her posture, the way her body shook from cold or hunger or both. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those otherworldly eyes. Then, as if summoning the last of her strength, she pushed herself upright, swaying unsteadily. Owen instinctively stepped forward, reaching out to steady her, but she flinched back, her movements jerky and defensive. Clearly, trust wasn't going to come easily. "You're hurt," Owen said gently, keeping his distance. "And you look half-starved. Let me help you." Her lips parted, revealing sharp, jagged teeth that glinted briefly in the lantern light. For a split second, fear prickled at the edges of Owen's resolve. But then he noticed the faint greenish hue of her blood dripping slowly from a gash on her forearm, pooling on the frosty ground. Whatever she was bleeding, and clearly in no condition to harm anyone. Without waiting for permission, Owen shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it carefully over her shoulders. She stiffened at first, but when she realized he wasn't attacking, she pulled the coat tighter around herself, wrapping it like a shield. Her gaze never left his face, wary but curious. "I've got food inside," Owen continued, speaking slowly as though addressing a frightened animal. "And warmth. You can stay until you're better. No strings attached." She blinked once, twice, as if processing his words. Then, with a hesitant nod, she took a shaky step forward, leaning heavily on the barn wall for support. Owen stayed close, ready to catch her if she collapsed, but she managed to keep moving, inch by painful inch, toward the house. The walk felt endless, each step filled with uncertainty. Every time the wind picked up, she tensed, glancing nervously toward the trees as though expecting danger to emerge at any moment. Owen wanted to reassure her, to tell her she was safe now, but he doubted she'd understand. Still, there was something deeply compelling about her presence, something fragile yet fierce, alien yet strangely familiar. When they finally reached the porch, Owen opened the door and gestured for her to go inside. She hesitated, scanning the interior of the house with those luminous eyes before finally stepping over the threshold. The warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth seemed to hit her like a wave, and she sagged against the wall, exhaling sharply. Owen watched her silently for a moment, taking in the full extent of her injuries. Beyond the gash on her arm, there were bruises mottling her otherwise smooth skin, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Whoever, or whatever, had done this to her, it hadn't been kind. "Well," Owen murmured, forcing a crooked smile, "welcome to my humble abode. Make yourself at home. Or as much as you can, anyway." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened ever so slightly, and for the first time since finding her, Owen allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could help her heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Though he didn't yet know the depth of the challenges ahead, one thing was certain: his quiet, predictable life had just taken a turn into the unknown. As the alien woman settled awkwardly into the worn armchair near the fireplace, Owen busied himself gathering supplies. He grabbed a bowl of warm water, clean rags, and a first aid kit from the cabinet. While he worked, he stole glances at her, marveling at the ethereal quality of her presence. Her shimmering skin reflected the firelight in a way that reminded him of sunlight dancing on rippling water. Despite her obvious distress, there was a grace to her movements, an elegance that seemed almost regal. "This might sting a bit," Owen warned as he knelt beside her chair, gesturing toward the gash on her arm. She nodded, though her expression remained guarded. Carefully, he dabbed at the wound with a damp cloth, wincing inwardly at the sight of her greenish blood mingling with the water. Up close, he noticed intricate patterns etched into her skin, delicate swirls and lines that shifted subtly as if alive. They pulsed faintly with each beat of her heart, adding to the mystery of who, or what, she truly was. She hissed softly when the antiseptic touched her injury, but otherwise remained still, her gaze fixed on him with unnerving focus. Owen tried to ignore the weight of her stare, concentrating instead on cleaning and bandaging the wound. "You're tough," he muttered, more to break the silence than anything else. "That's good. You'll need to be." Once he finished tending to her arm, he stood and rummaged through the pantry, pulling out bread, cheese, and a pot of stew he'd made earlier in the week. Placing the food on a tray, he set it on the table in front of her. "Eat," he urged, pointing at the dishes. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She hesitated, eyeing the offerings warily. Owen noticed her sharp teeth again as she leaned forward to sniff the stew, her nostrils flaring delicately. After a moment, she tentatively picked up a piece of bread and nibbled at it. Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened, and she devoured the rest of the slice in 2 quick bites. Encouraged, Owen handed her a spoon, showing her how to use it with exaggerated motions. She mimicked him clumsily but effectively, digging into the stew with surprising enthusiasm. Watching her eat stirred something in Owen, a mix of pity and protectiveness. He couldn't imagine what she'd endured to end up here, injured and starving, on his remote farm. The brutality of whatever had driven her to Earth weighed heavily on his mind. Yet, amidst the sadness, there was also awe. This creature before him wasn't just surviving. She was adapting, learning, trusting him just enough to accept his help. Between bites, she began experimenting with gestures, using her hands to communicate. At first, her movements were hesitant, almost shy, but soon she grew bolder, shaping objects and actions in the air. Owen caught on quickly, mimicking her gestures in return. When she traced a spiral above her chest, he pointed to himself and said, "Owen." She tilted her head, repeating the name slowly, her voice melodic and unfamiliar. Then, placing a hand over her own chest, she uttered a single syllable, "Lyra." "Lyra," Owen repeated, smiling. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." Her lips curved upward in what might have been the beginnings of a smile, though it vanished almost instantly. Instead, she resumed eating, though her pace slowed as her hunger ebbed. When she finally pushed the empty bowl away, she slumped back in the chair, her exhaustion evident. Owen fetched a blanket and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. "You should rest," he said, gesturing toward the couch. "We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." Lyra nodded, though her eyes darted toward the window, scanning the darkness outside. Whatever fears haunted her were far from gone, but for now, she seemed willing to trust him. As Owen banked the fire and prepared for bed, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden behind those luminous eyes, and whether he was truly ready to uncover them. Over the next few days, Owen and Lyra settled into an uneasy rhythm. Each morning, Owen would rise early to tend to his chores, leaving Lyra to rest and recover in the safety of the farmhouse. By afternoon, he'd return to find her exploring the house, examining everything with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She was particularly fascinated by books, flipping through their pages even though she couldn't read. Pictures captivated her most, and Owen often caught her tracing illustrations with her fingers, her expression softening into something resembling wonder. Their communication improved steadily, thanks to a combination of gestures, sounds, and trial-and-error experimentation. Lyra learned basic words quickly: food, water, fire, and Owen marveled at her ability to adapt. In return, she taught him snippets of her own language, melodic phrases that rolled off her tongue like music. Though he couldn't replicate them perfectly, she seemed amused by his attempts, her sharp-toothed grin becoming more frequent. Despite these small victories, tension lingered between them. Lyra rarely ventured outside during daylight, preferring to stay hidden in the shadows of the house. At night, however, she became restless, pacing near the windows and listening intently to the sounds of the surrounding wilderness. Owen suspected she was afraid of being discovered, though by whom, or what, he couldn't guess. Once, he asked her directly, miming a question about danger. Her response was immediate and visceral. Her entire body went rigid, her eyes narrowing as she emitted a low, guttural growl. It was clear the topic upset her, so Owen dropped it, vowing to tread lightly in the future. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Lyra surprised him by reaching out and touching his hand. Her touch was cool but gentle, almost reverent. She held his gaze, her luminous eyes searching his face as if seeking reassurance. Owen nodded slowly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm here," he said softly. "Whatever you're running from, you're safe here." Though she didn't reply verbally, Owen sensed gratitude in her demeanor. From that moment on, their bond deepened. Lyra began helping around the house, fetching tools or stacking firewood with surprising efficiency. Her strength was remarkable. Tasks that would take Owen hours were completed in minutes under her capable hands. Yet, despite her physical prowess, she handled delicate objects with care, proving herself both formidable and gentle. Their interactions weren't without humor, either. One afternoon, while attempting to teach Lyra how to milk a cow, Owen ended up drenched when the startled animal kicked over the bucket, sending milk flying everywhere. Lyra doubled over with silent laughter, her shoulders shaking as she clutched her sides. Owen joined in, the absurdity of the situation breaking the tension. For a brief moment, they were simply two beings sharing a laugh, forgetting the vast gulf between their worlds. Yet, beneath the growing camaraderie, Owen couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that trouble loomed on the horizon. Lyra's occasional lapses into brooding silence hinted at unresolved trauma, and her heightened vigilance suggested she wasn't fully convinced of their sanctuary's security. Still, Owen resolved to protect her, no matter the cost. If danger came knocking, he'd face it head-on, for her sake and for his own. Late one night, as Owen lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a sudden crash shattered the quiet. Bolting upright, he grabbed the flashlight from his bedside table and rushed into the living room. There, standing frozen in the doorway, was Lyra, her glowing eyes wide with alarm. Outside, the wind whipped violently, rattling the shutters and sending leaves spiraling across the yard. But that wasn't what had startled them. A deafening roar echoed through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of something massive landing heavily on the roof. The house shook, dust raining down from the rafters. Owen's heart pounded as he glanced at Lyra, who was already moving toward the window, her movements tense and deliberate. He hurried to join her, peering out into the darkness. At first, all he could see were shadows shifting against the tree-line. Then, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared, hovering just beyond the edge of the porch light. They blinked once, twice, before vanishing entirely. Silence fell, oppressive and suffocating. Owen's grip tightened on the flashlight, his knuckles whitening. "What is it?" he whispered, though he knew she wouldn't answer in words. Lyra's jaw clenched, her sharp teeth glinting faintly in the dim light. She placed a hand on his shoulder, pushing him gently backward, positioning herself between him and the window. Whatever was out there, she recognized it, and it terrified her. Another thud rocked the house, this time accompanied by the unmistakable scrape of claws against wood. Owen's stomach churned as realization dawned. "It's looking for you," he breathed, turning to meet her gaze. Lyra nodded grimly, her expression hardening into something fierce and resolute. Before Owen could protest, she darted toward the kitchen, snatching up a carving knife from the counter. He followed, grabbing a sturdy cast-iron skillet for lack of anything better. Together, they positioned themselves near the front door, listening as the intruder circled the house, its movements deliberate and menacing. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a splintering crash, sending shards of wood flying. A towering figure lunged inside, its form vaguely humanoid but grotesquely distorted. Its elongated limbs ended in clawed hands, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with rows of serrated teeth. Most horrifying of all were its eyes, those same glowing red orbs that had stared at them from the darkness. Lyra reacted instantly, launching herself at the creature with startling speed. Her blade flashed in the dim light as she struck, aiming for its throat. The creature roared in pain, swiping at her with a clawed hand. She dodged nimbly, her movements fluid and precise, but Owen could see the strain in her face. She was still recovering from her injuries, and this fight was taking its toll. Desperate to help, Owen swung the skillet with all his might, catching the creature squarely on the side of its head. It staggered, momentarily stunned, giving Lyra the opening she needed. With a final, vicious thrust, she buried the knife deep into its chest. The creature let out a guttural scream before collapsing in a heap, its body twitching spasmodically before going still. Panting, Lyra turned to Owen, her chest heaving as she surveyed the damage. The room was a mess, broken furniture, scattered debris, but they were alive. For now. Owen dropped the skillet, his hands trembling as adrenaline coursed through him. "Is it dead?" he asked hoarsely. Lyra crouched beside the creature, inspecting it closely. After a moment, she nodded, though her expression remained grim. She pointed toward the door, miming the act of dragging something away. Owen understood immediately. They couldn't leave the body here. It would attract attention, raise questions they weren't prepared to answer. Working together, they hauled the creature's corpse out into the field, dumping it in a shallow ravine where it would be less likely to be found. By the time they returned to the house, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Exhausted but alive, they collapsed onto the couch, staring at each other in silence. For the first time, Owen truly grasped the magnitude of the danger Lyra faced, and the lengths she'd gone to protect him. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever enemies pursued her, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't abandon her. Not now. Not ever. In the days following the attack, Owen and Lyra fortified the farmhouse, reinforcing doors and windows with scrap metal and lumber. They worked tirelessly, their shared determination forging an unspoken bond deeper than words could express. Lyra proved invaluable, her knowledge of structural weaknesses and defensive strategies surpassing anything Owen had encountered before. She guided him with precision, pointing out vulnerabilities he'd overlooked, her luminous eyes scanning every inch of the property. Yet, as the physical defenses strengthened, so too did the emotional walls between them begin to crumble. Late one evening, after securing the perimeter, Owen found Lyra sitting cross-legged on the floor, poring over an old atlas he'd unearthed from the attic. Her finger traced the outline of continents, pausing occasionally as if committing their shapes to memory. Curious, Owen joined her, explaining the concept of maps and geography as best he could. Though much of it was lost in translation, Lyra's fascination was palpable, her questions animated and eager. This newfound curiosity extended beyond maps. Lyra began asking about Earth's history, its cultures, and its people. Owen struggled to condense centuries of human experience into digestible anecdotes, often resorting to storytelling to bridge the gaps. Tales of bravery, love, and resilience captivated her, sparking emotions that transcended language barriers. In return, she shared fragments of her own past, using gestures and expressions to convey stories of distant stars, ancient civilizations, and unimaginable wonders. These exchanges transformed their relationship, transforming them from reluctant allies into true companions. Amidst these moments of connection, however, Owen couldn't ignore the lingering sense of unease. Lyra's descriptions of her homeworld hinted at a society vastly different from humanity's, a place where power dynamics were brutal and survival depended on ruthless cunning. He saw glimpses of that ruthlessness in her demeanor, especially when she practiced combat techniques in the yard, her movements swift and lethal. Yet, there was also gentleness in her touch, a tenderness that emerged when she tended to the animals or helped Owen with his chores. This duality intrigued him, challenging his preconceived notions of strength and vulnerability. Their bond deepened further during quiet evenings spent by the fire. On one such night, Owen played a tune on his harmonica, a simple melody passed down from his grandfather. To his surprise, Lyra joined in, humming softly in harmony. Her voice, rich and resonant, blended seamlessly with the music, creating a hauntingly beautiful duet. When the song ended, they exchanged smiles, wordlessly acknowledging the significance of the moment. Music, it seemed, required no translation. These intimate interactions brought clarity to Owen's feelings. He admired Lyra, not just for her courage or resourcefulness, but for her capacity to adapt, to learn, and to trust despite her harrowing experiences. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known, and the thought of losing her filled him with a pang of dread. Yet, alongside admiration came doubt. Could he truly protect her? Was he equipped to face whatever threats pursued her across galaxies? Lyra, too, grappled with conflicting emotions. Owen's kindness and unwavering support challenged her perceptions of humans, species she'd been taught to view as primitive and insignificant. Yet, his actions spoke volumes, demonstrating a depth of character that defied stereotypes. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to lower her guard, allowing herself to depend on him, not just for shelter or sustenance, but for companionship. The realization frightened her, stirring fears of attachment she'd long suppressed. If she let herself care too deeply, what would happen when the inevitable separation came? Despite these uncertainties, their connection flourished, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Together, they navigated the complexities of coexistence, blending their disparate worlds into something uniquely their own. Whether facing external threats or internal doubts, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared journey. And though neither dared to voice it aloud, both knew their lives had been irrevocably changed, for better or worse, by the paths that led them to each other. Night fell once more, blanketing the countryside in a deceptive calm. Inside the farmhouse, Owen and Lyra sat side by side, their bodies tense with anticipation. The events of recent days had left them both weary, yet sleep eluded them. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent their hearts racing. They knew the attacker they defeated was unlikely to be alone. Others would come, drawn by scent or signal, relentless in their pursuit. Lyra's gaze drifted to the window, her luminous eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the cracks in the boards they'd nailed across the glass. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the chilly air. Turning to Owen, she placed a hand on his knee, drawing his attention. Without words, she communicated urgency, her gestures sharp and deliberate. She pointed toward the barn, then mimicked packing supplies, her meaning clear: they needed to prepare for departure. Owen nodded grimly, rising to his feet. He understood the necessity, though the thought of leaving his home, the only life he'd ever known, filled him with dread. Yet, staying meant risking not only their lives but also exposing the truth about Lyra to a world unprepared for such revelations. Reluctantly, he began gathering essentials: food, water, blankets, tools. Lyra assisted, her movements efficient and purposeful, her instincts honed by years of survival. As they packed, Owen couldn't help but wonder where they'd go. The nearest town was miles away, and blending into human society with Lyra's striking appearance would be nearly impossible. Even if they managed to evade detection initially, her unique physiology would eventually attract unwanted attention. Escape, it seemed, was merely a temporary solution, a delaying tactic rather than a resolution. His musings were interrupted by a soft whine from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the frost-covered grass. Both froze, their eyes locking in silent agreement. Grabbing a lantern, Owen crept toward the door, Lyra close behind him, her knife already in hand. Peering through the gap between the boards, he scanned the darkness, searching for movement. There, near the edge of the tree-line, stood a figure, humanoid in shape but unmistakably alien. Its skin shimmered faintly, similar to Lyra's but tinged with a sickly yellow hue. It raised a hand, palm outward, in what might have been a gesture of peace. Owen hesitated, glancing back at Lyra, who shook her head vehemently. Trust was not an option. The figure stepped closer, its features becoming clearer in the dim light. Unlike Lyra's elegant grace, this newcomer radiated menace, its angular face twisted into a sneer. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the shadows, forming a loose semicircle around the house. Owen counted 5, 6, 7 figures in total, each armed with crude yet menacing weapons. "They're here," Owen whispered, his voice barely audible. Lyra gripped his arm, pulling him back from the door. She pointed toward the barn again, urgency flashing in her eyes. Time was running out. Moving quickly, they slipped out the back door, keeping low as they dashed across the open space separating the house from the barn. The cold bit at their exposed skin, but neither slowed their pace. Reaching the barn, Lyra used her knife to pry open the lock, ushering Owen inside before securing the door behind them. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of hay and livestock. Owen fumbled for a match, lighting a lantern hanging from a beam. The soft glow illuminated their surroundings, revealing stacks of tools, bales of hay, and the huddled forms of frightened animals. Lyra wasted no time, beginning to construct a makeshift barricade using whatever materials were at hand. Outside, the invaders' voices rose in harsh, guttural tones, their language incomprehensible but their intent clear. They were hunting, closing in like predators scenting prey. Owen's grip tightened on the crowbar he'd grabbed from the workbench, his knuckles white with tension. Beside him, Lyra positioned herself near the door, her stance poised and ready. "They'll break through eventually," Owen muttered, his voice tight with anxiety. "We can't hold them off forever." Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sudden burst of inspiration, she gestured wildly toward the loft above them, pointing upward and mimicking climbing. Owen understood immediately. The loft offered higher ground, a tactical advantage if they could reach it before the attackers breached the barn. Together, they scrambled up the ladder, dragging supplies with them. Once atop the loft, they crouched behind a stack of hay bales, peering down through the gaps in the wooden planks. Below, the barn door groaned under the weight of multiple bodies slamming against it. Splinters flew as the lock gave way, and the invaders poured inside, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Lyra pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence. Owen nodded, his breath shallow as he clutched the crowbar tightly. The invaders spread out, their movements methodical as they searched for their quarry. One of them paused directly beneath the loft, tilting its head as if sensing their presence. Owen's pulse thundered in his ears, every fiber of his being screaming to strike first. But Lyra's hand on his wrist stopped him, her touch firm yet calming. "Patience," her eyes seemed to say. "Wait for the right moment." Seconds stretched into eternity as the invaders prowled below, their frustration mounting. Finally, one of them spotted the ladder leading to the loft and signaled to the others. As they converged on the base of the ladder, Lyra sprang into action. With a swift motion, she hurled a heavy tool down onto the lead invader, sending it sprawling. Chaos erupted as the others retaliated, firing projectiles that embedded themselves harmlessly in the hay bales. Seizing the opportunity, Owen launched himself over the edge of the loft, swinging the crowbar with all his might. It connected solidly with an invader's skull, dropping it instantly. Lyra joined him moments later, her knife flashing in the dim light as she dispatched another. Together, they fought with desperate ferocity, their combined efforts driving the remaining attackers back toward the door. But victory came at a cost. Owen stumbled, clutching his side where a projectile had grazed him, warm blood seeping through his fingers. Lyra turned to check on him, her expression torn between concern and determination. More invaders surged forward, unwilling to retreat. "We can't win this," Owen gasped, his voice strained. We need to go. Now. Lyra hesitated, her gaze darting between him and the dwindling number of foes. Then, with a decisive nod, she grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the rear exit of the barn. Bursting through the doors, they sprinted into the night, their pursuers hot on their heels. Ahead, the forest loomed, a labyrinth of shadows and possibilities. Without hesitation, Lyra veered into the trees, pulling Owen along with her. Branches whipped at their faces, roots threatened to trip them, but they pushed onward, driven by sheer willpower. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded slightly, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Finally, they reached a narrow ravine, its steep walls offering temporary refuge. Sliding down into the hollow, they collapsed against the rocky surface, gasping for breath. Above, the stars twinkled indifferently, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. "We can't keep running forever," Owen panted, clutching his injured side. "They'll find us." Lyra shook her head, her eyes blazing with resolve. She pointed to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. Rising to her feet, she extended a hand to Owen, her message clear: they had no choice but to keep moving. Taking her hand, Owen allowed himself to be pulled upright. Together, they set off once more, their destination unknown but their resolve unshaken. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side, bound by a connection forged in fire and shadow. As dawn broke over the horizon, Owen and Lyra pressed on through the forest, their footsteps crunching softly against the frost-covered ground. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but neither dared to believe they were safe. Every snapped twig or rustling leaf set their nerves on edge, yet they moved with purpose, driven by a shared determination to survive. Finally, after hours of relentless trekking, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin tucked deep within the woods. It was small and weathered, its roof sagging under years of neglect, but it offered shelter and a chance to regroup. Lyra gestured for Owen to stay back as she cautiously inspected the interior, her knife at the ready. Finding it empty, she signaled him inside. Once settled, Lyra tended to Owen's wound with practiced care, her touch gentle despite the circumstances. As she worked, Owen noticed something shift in her demeanor, a flicker of vulnerability beneath her steely resolve. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly rest, leaning against the wall as exhaustion claimed her. Watching her sleep, Owen felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever battles lay ahead, he vowed not to let her face them alone. Hours later, Lyra woke with a start, her eyes scanning the room before locking onto Owen's. Without words, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it firmly. In that moment, Owen understood. Their journey wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, connection, and the unyielding bond they'd forged. When night fell again, they emerged from the cabin, prepared to confront whatever awaited them. Standing side by side, they faced the darkness together, two souls united across worlds. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they would walk it as one. The stars above shimmered brightly, casting their light on the unlikely pair. Together, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to write their story, not as farmer and alien, but as partners bound by courage, love, and the promise of hope.